Good afternoon, everybody. A very warm welcome to today's NHS Impact Lunch and Learn. I'm Amar, the National Clinical Director for Improvement, and it's my real privilege to host these sessions. Thanks for joining. It is lunchtime, and so feel free to keep the camera off if you prefer. But thank you for joining. If you're eating lunch, you're very, very welcome to keep listening in and to contribute through the conversation. We hope these lunch and learns are giving you a way to hear a little bit about some of the excellent practice that's going on in the field of improvement across the country so that you can learn about it, you can ask some questions, you can think about how you might want to bring some of the concepts and principles back home to your own organisation and service. As always with these sessions, we are recording the session. So it'll be available for people to look back at afterwards and to watch on futures. We're going to keep you muted for at least the first part of the session so we can really hear clearly from our keynote guest speaker today. But we really do want to encourage interaction, so there'll be plenty of opportunity for you to throw your comments into the chat as we're going and to ask questions as well at the end about anything you're particularly curious about. And it's my great pleasure now to introduce our speaker for today, Jacqueline Myers, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at NHS North East and North Cumbria Integrated Care Board. So thank you so much, Jacqueline, for joining us and for sharing some of your work with us today. And we look forward to hearing more about it and then offering some questions and comments and reflections for you afterwards. So Jacqueline, over to you. Thanks very much.
Oh, thanks so much, Mia, and hi everybody. It's lovely to be here and to introduce this peer review toolkit that we've pretty recently developed in North East and North Cumbria. I always enjoy these sorts of sessions myself. It's great to hear what's going on around the place. So I hope that you find this interesting. And as Amar said, I'd be really pleased to have a good old chat about it at the end and hear any other experiences people are having around this sort of work around the country. So I thought I would just start, if that's okay, by saying a little bit briefly about Boost, which is our North East and North Cumbria Learning and Improvement Community, in case I'm sure many of you are not familiar with it, because it's context for why we decided to develop the toolkit. So just 3 years ago, in the first year of our existence as an integrated care board, we were very keen, led by particularly our chief exec, Sam Allen, and our chairman, Sir Liam Donaldson, to do something substantive around developing a learning and improvement community for the North East and North Cumbria that was really open and was co-led and across the range of partners and stakeholders who are interested in and affected by health and care. And wider determinants of health across the North East and North Cumbria. We all have our challenges, don't we? But certainly in the North East and North Cumbria, we have some of the most significant and enduring issues in terms of poor outcomes and wide inequalities in terms of outcomes. And we know that these issues are complex, they're multi-generational, and no single organisation can hope to make a significant impact alone. So we stepped into this space, developed the community. The slide here, which you probably won't have time to read all of, but hopefully you'll get the slides later, just gives you a little idea about how we approach it. We have this very simple structure of connect, learn, lead and improve. And we're focused on providing opportunities for people to build trust and collaborative relationships in a deep way, always centering people who do the real work and people who have lived experience or are currently involved in accessing the services or the issues that we're tackling. And we're also very focused on providing training opportunities, resources to learn from peers, and practical hands-on tools that people can deploy in service of improving things. And so the peer review toolkit that I'm going to share with you is an example of a sort of practical resource that we've looked to develop in this way. So then just a quick word about the use of peer review in North East and North Cumbria in recent times. I'm sure many of us throughout our career have been involved in or party to peer review in different ways. My personal experience of peer review is most significant through leading cancer services and the very structured approach to peer review that used to be deployed in service of delivering the NICE guidance and so on in the cancer community. As I've mentioned, we've got this Boost community, and within that, a very broad commitment to take a learning and improvement approach to everything we do. And we've got a mission that we hope in time to become the best at getting better. And so we try to always think about improvement approaches in all of the work that we as commissioners lead, and get involved with our partners. And the other bit of context I wanted to share is that a key area of focus for us in North East North Cumbria has been in building relationships across the system. So we sponsor a whole array of networks of leaders ourselves. So we have networks with the local authority, chief execs, directors of adult social care. We have networks with our professional colleagues across the provider trusts. We have networks with our voluntary and community sector. And of course, we have communities of practice for people working close to the front line. And we have lots of arrangements for connecting with people with lived experience. And we leverage those networks a lot when we're moving into thinking about doing improvement work in a particular area. And then we've also, through this kind of relational approach, found ourselves reaching for peer review quite a lot in our first couple of years in operation. And it would sometimes be, I have to say, quite an informal, or let's do a peer review, let's have a peer-to-peer conversation about a particular issue. We would tend to deploy peer review usually in perhaps quite a targeted area to look at a particular challenge or problem that we found we were grappling with in a part of the system. But we also, in one example, set up quite an enduring peer-to-peer support system, which might be a whole other lunch and learn, where we got 2 leadership teams in 2 provider trusts to go into a memorandum of understanding for a 12-month support arrangement. And within that, they did a number of targeted peer reviews. So we've also used it in the sort of financial check and challenge environment as we're trying to land our annual plan, and in looking at ambulance handover improvement work. And reflecting on how that had gone in the first couple of years, although it's generally well received, we were picking up a few challenges in the process. And a couple that I would highlight would be that there were a few occasions when individual leaders who were asked to play a peer reviewer role expressed some uncertainty or degree of lack of confidence about their ability to fulfil that peer review, or perhaps just some questions about how that might be approached and what the requirements were. And we also felt there were a couple of examples where there's perhaps a good initial conversation peer-to-peer, but not necessarily a particularly structured conversation, and that the outcomes from that conversation weren't captured particularly well, and that there perhaps wasn't follow-up to see whether the learning that came out of the conversation had been deployed, and kind of closing the loop on that cycle. So just some thoughts that, or whilst we still felt peer review was a really useful kind of tool in the kit, as it were, we perhaps could do it better. So that led to thinking about developing this peer review toolkit. So at the time that I started to think about codifying an approach to peer review for use in our system, we happened to be doing some work with AQUA, the Advancing Quality Alliance that many of you will be aware of. That was actually around developing our in-house improvement training in the ICB based on the CUSA system. So I had a conversation and ended up commissioning them to help us co-produce the peer review toolkit. And as you would imagine, in line with our general approach to how we do things with a learning and improvement lens on it, the brief, if you like, that we gave to AQUA was to think about producing a peer review toolkit that was very accessible and could be used by a whole array of partners and members of our Boost community, and therefore it had to be, if you like, a profession neutral, topic neutral, sector neutral, in line with the way we tend to position our Boost resources. We also wanted it to be comprehensive and practical, so ideally a kit that somebody who had no experience of peer review could pick up and feel confident to have a crack at delivering a peer review based on the tools and links that were available in the toolkit. And then thirdly, of course, we wanted it as a document itself to be co-produced. So we agreed this commission, and as part of this, we asked AQUA to look at what was good practice around the country or even the planet, if you like, in terms of the deployment of peer review, to talk to some of the stakeholders who would be likely the users of the toolkit once it was available, which they did. They met with quite a few of our networks in the system, I think with our directors of adult social care, with our chief operating officers, our chief finance officers and our chief nurse networks, to talk about the early shaping of the approach. And then helpfully in June this year we had our annual Boost conference, and as part of that we had a part of the agenda where people could elect to join workshops, and there were 3 rounds of that. So we did some workshopping of the draft tool in June and got a lot of helpful feedback that helped further refine it before finalising it, and towards the end of June, July this year. So it's a very fresh piece of work I'm sharing with you, so I'm slightly humbled because I've not got a lot of examples of how it's been deployed so far, but part of the motivation to share it with you today is actually, if people want to take it away and give it a run out, then that would be helpful too, and be keen to get that feedback and further improve it as a resource. So what I'm going to do now is just share with you some examples of the content of the toolkit, so you can see what the resource looks like. Obviously it's a significant resource, so I've just picked a handful of slides to share with you, but it'll give you a bit of an idea of the way that we've shaped it and what's in there. And as I said, at the end I'll share a link if people want to go and download the whole thing and have a look at it, either to inform something that you want to refine for use locally, or indeed to try it in its current form, then everyone's welcome to do that. So here you go. Here's a few example slides from the peer review toolkit. So we start with what is peer review, and describe some of the principles that we've used to underpin it. So I think it's we're really committed to a sort of appreciative inquiry type approach, wanting to recognise that peer review is essentially as the title would suggest, an activity between peers. And that's an important thing to emphasise from the position of being the leadership team within the Integrated Care Board, because I think it's important there isn't a third party in the room in peer review. So we're very much encouraged, where we do deploy a peer review approach, that it's a conversation between the 2 peers. And while we want to offer a resource and a framework to put around that, there's no requirement, if you like, for the output of that peer review to be, if you like, reported in a formal way back to a third party overseer, if you like. So it's very much holding to that peer review principle. And that's important because I think one of the magic things about peer review is that it's the opportunity to talk to people who've got comparable experience to the situation you find yourself in professionally, and there's that kind of sympathy, understanding, and it tends to engender fairly early kind of trust and openness. And it's important that that sort of magic, if I can call it, element of peer review is preserved, because that's gives you a different potential for learning than some of the other approaches we might take. We've then got some examples of how peer review is used in particular sectors and how it might be used. And then it goes into some very practical resources. So again, I won't sort of dwell on all of this in great detail, but this is the 4-stage process that we're recommending in terms of how people structure peer review. So a very simple cycle of pre-review, which is really about setting yourself up for success, and making sure that you've got the kind of understanding and consent of all parties. People know what to expect. You're gathering information. There's the review itself. There's advice on how to collate together the results of the peer review and feed them back. And then there's a kind of advice on how to action the outcomes of the peer review and how to follow up. So those are the 4 stages that we've set out in terms of a peer review cycle. And then the rest of the toolkit effectively is structured around those 4 areas. So again, I'll show you some examples. So this is the sort of next stage of detail in terms of the 4 stages of the peer review process itself, and beginning to describe in more detail. And then each element of the peer review process has a slide like this that talks about the sorts of activities and inputs that you might put into that stage of the process, what outputs and deliverables you might expect to produce in that stage of the process, and then some assumptions and expectations. This section actually is something that came out of the workshopping and engagement that we did on the early draft. And then outcomes and impact. So hopefully a really practical way of thinking about how you actually execute each stage of the peer review in terms of what you do to prepare, what you'd expect to come out of it, and then some advice on you know, some of the things that you might do around the process. Each section has a number of actual forms, pro formas, those sorts of things, so that you know, obviously none of this is a requirement to use. It's a resource kit, but literally in service of it being a comprehensive toolkit, there are these sorts of things in there so that you can literally download these and use them as your physical digital resources to deliver the peer review. So there's lots of examples of this sort of thing. And then each of the 4 stages has a section called Tools and Templates, where there are links. I think having revisited the slides, we do need to reconsider the yellow on yellow colour scheme, so apologies for that. But there are lots of additional resources that people can draw on to help them deliver each stage of the peer review. So here, for example, there's some advice on how to sort of set out the purpose using the sort of lift speech. I've never heard lift speech before. It's a nice kind of sort of English version of the elevator pitch. And you know, how to do stakeholder mapping, how to identify and support peer reviewers, and so on. So again, I won't go through all of this line by line, but lots of practical resources that people can draw on, but very much in a sort of pick and mix arrangement, so that depending on how the peer reviewers are feeling about the approach they're taking and where they might need a bit more support, they can delve deeper into a rich seam of resources to support them. And because I really like these tools and template slides, I've included a few of them in the examples. So this is the tools and templates slide around the delivery of the peer review itself. And so you can see here that we've included some tools around creating psychological safety and in taking an appreciative inquiry approach, both of which I think are really helpful ways to think about how you approach the task of being a peer reviewer. And again, so also some in this section, some resources around use of data and insight in service of the peer review process that you can see there. And then another tool and template slide here, this one thinking more about how you marshal the output of the peer review into a set of recommendations, and thinking about how you position those recommendations in a helpful way for those who will be receiving them. So again, a few different resources there. I mentioned that one of the issues that we had identified in peer review was how do we support people to understand what their particular role is in the process, and this is an example of a slide that we've got describing roles. I have to say, having reflected on the toolkit in preparation for this session, I think this is an area we could do a little bit more work, as there are some resources as I've just pointed up there, but I think there's a bit more we could do on the specific lead roles in peer review, but this is an example of some of the work we've done on roles and responsibilities. And then, as I mentioned, this is at a really early stage. It's only a couple of months old, but I thought I would, in the spirit of openness, share some early intelligence on how it's going in terms of the deployment of the toolkit. So recently we deployed the toolkit in a discharge arrangements peer review exercise that we instigated in our system. This was something actually slightly unusually that our chief exec suggested would be a good idea, and she followed that up with conversations with both the chief execs of the relevant hospital provider trusts and also the partner local authorities, and there was agreement at chief executive level that indeed this would be a helpful thing to do. And then my team followed up with the directors of adult social care and chief operating officers and identified lead peer reviewers in a partner local authority and provider trust to then work with actually 2 local authorities and another provider trust who are having some significant challenges in the discharge arrangements field. I guess the learning I would say here was that once we moved down that level into the organisation that was, if you like, the reviewee organisations in local authority rather than reviewers, we did hit quite a lot of resistance and concern. And as we dug into that, the issue was around worries about the level of resource and capacity that would be needed within the local authorities to participate in the peer review process, which based on the experience we'd had most recently of peer review, we found quite confusing. And I think when we got to the bottom of it, it became clear that peer review, if you like, capital P, capital R, is a really significant undertaking in local authority. It's something that tends to be very wide in scope, very comprehensive in terms of looking at the whole of a local authority's kind of ways of working, a bit like, I suppose, a well-led inspection that we might recognise it for those colleagues who are from an NHS background, but with bells on. And there was a kind of assumption that we were looking to go down a road of that sort of scope and intensity. And of course, that wasn't the case, but just was a real lesson around the effort that you put into setting something up and making sure that there's a kind of understanding of expectations, resources, and impact is really, really important. So we kind of went back round the loop on that, by which time the kind of conversations that need to happen had happened. So that was, if you like, an unsuccessful deployment of the toolkit, which I thought I would share in the spirit of openness. More successful was using it with colleagues in ED departments around ambulance handover that I mentioned earlier. We had previously done some ambulance handover peer review visits, and we've done a couple more where they deployed the toolkit, and we've had pretty positive feedback on that basis. And again, that's fairly fresh. So whether I hope to follow up and see that it's had a positive impact on the degree to which what came out of the peer review has been followed up and actioned. So we're just in that part of the process now. But to share from that, I think a useful bit of learning that came out of that is we had really positive feedback from the reviewers about how great a learning opportunity it had been for them, even though, if you like, the nature of that process was that they were kind of going in as a partner who had pretty sustained success in this particular area of ambulance handover to give peer support and do a review of a team who were struggling. So I think it's really worth emphasising that done well, peer review can be a really positive experience for all parties. And then just this last couple of weeks, we've just agreed to deploy the toolkit in a series of reviews we're going to undertake in relation to the deployment of the Safer Staffing tool, which, for those who don't know, is a tool that's in use pretty much in all of our acute hospitals to ensure safe nursing staffing on inpatient wards principally. And so we're going to use peer review and the toolkit to dig into variation of application of the tool and the link of that to safety and cost. So not yet complete, but I'm looking forward to drawing the learning from that peer review process that's just about to get underway. So that's it in a nutshell, Amar. It's a fairly straightforward offer. This is our QR code and web address for anybody who's interested to have a look at the total tool, or indeed any of our other Boost resources. And I'd be happy to take any questions about the toolkit or hear from others about experience they've got in this space to help us continue on our mission, being the best at getting better, which I'm not suggesting we're anywhere near achieving, but we travel in hope and hope to learn from others too. Thanks very much.
Brilliant, Jacqueline. That's super, and it's a really super mission to have, to be the best at getting better. And I know just how generous you and your colleagues have been already with sharing some of the learning from the learning and improvement community, the Boost network that you've built, and I'm sure many of the group have already heard about. So it's really super to hear a little bit more about the peer review toolkit and how you've designed it and some of your early learning about it. It would be great to take some thoughts and reflections and questions from the room. If you fancy putting a question to Jacqueline, or you want to just share your own reflections or thoughts about it, just put your hand up or put something in the chat, and I'll invite you in to join the conversation. Who want to give us a second or so to see who'd like to kick us off?
That's a nice comment there from one of our colleagues in the Midlands.
Yeah, thanks, Louise. And Jonathan, fantastic to have you join us for this session. Come on in and share your thoughts.
Thanks, Amar. So just a bit of context here. So I work at the Royal College of Ophthalmologists, where we have a review service which does very similar peer reviews for ophthalmology departments. And one of the ongoing problems we have is we can offer the best service in terms of offering recommendations and bringing experience into the room. What we struggle with is the translation of that knowledge into change within the organizations. So we have ongoing meetings and follow-ups with organizations, but realizing that change in a cash-strapped and very demanded service is quite difficult. So I just value any thoughts you had on how, from the Boost network, how you've managed to see change implemented, and how you've managed to do those follow-up areas. And I appreciate there's no easy answers on those bits, but just what your experience has been, because I think that's the most difficult part of peer review. Most people are happy to share learning and share their experience, but translating that into change is sometimes the most difficult part.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I agree with you. I don't think we've got a magic bullet here. I think we have seen some examples of light bulb moments where, for example, in the ambulance handover discussions, where teams have shared particular approaches that they've taken either to, so I can think of an example between two providers where they talked about how they escalated it internally in their department and how they adjusted slightly roles within the department to facilitate that. And we saw adoption of that practice in the team that had been visited. So there are examples, and I think they can be quite micro, but there are examples of where having that peer-to-peer conversation about exactly how difficult something is, the things you've tried, the things that haven't worked, the difficulties you're facing. Sometimes they can kind of be cultural, all sorts of things. I think you get potentially these incremental and micro things that might not have been adopted had it not been for those peer-to-peer conversations. But I think you have to sort of set peer review, kind of situate it in a kind of broader, multi-pronged approach to improvement. We had really interesting debates actually in our leadership team about, well, if we're going to sponsor peer review, shouldn't we ask to see all of the action plans and outputs that come from peer review, so we can then check that the actions that were identified are followed up? And I think that's really difficult, because I think that just changes the nature of the conversation. But the fact is that where we've got particular challenges to, a kind of, a quality issue, a performance issue, or whatever, we'll be having other conversations about it through other approaches as well. And so I feel like you should deploy the peer review process in a pure way, if you like, but you're also picking up conversations through your, if you like, oversight and regulatory route as well. And it's kind of sort of pushing from various angles to get to the destination. I don't know if that answers your question, Jonathan, but I think it is difficult if your only tool is peer review to think about how you, if you like, have oversight of the delivery of the outputs, because the kind of nature of it is that you're putting the onus on the participants to take personal ownership for that follow up themselves.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Thanks, Jonathan. Really good question. We have introduced peer review as well as part of our quality processes in East London, but we use it as part of an assurance system where people can go and visit each other and look at standards and learn, but in identifying gaps knowing that they can then apply their improvement method to tackle those gaps. So yeah, I think the point about it being part of a suite of ways of which people can learn and improve is really critical, isn't it? There's a couple of questions in the chat, Jacqueline. I thought we might ask you to share your thoughts on. So one is about culture, and I've certainly commissioned and seen and lots of peer reviews on that when we spotted that there might be some deeply ingrained issues around culture within services. And the second from Natasha, perhaps a more operational one around how do you deploy this? How do you socialize this across quite a large network across the system?
Okay. On the culture issue, I think, what can I say about that? I think thinking about who might be appropriate peers to matchmake is it's a kind of important to think about that. So, and I spoke a little bit, but thinking about how you can prepare peer reviewers to work together in the spirit of appreciative inquiry, psychological safety, those sorts of things, so that it's a positive experience. And not necessarily a kind of cozy one, because hopefully in the spirit of appreciative inquiry and psychological safety, people can go into difficult issues and ask challenging questions, but do so in a kind of appreciative and supportive way. So I think there's something about the setup, and I think stepping back a little bit, it's also about the kind of culture that we create in the broadest sense, isn't it? So I think if you can't sort of save your appreciative inquiry and psychological safety for peer review. You've got to live it every day. I know that's a statement of the obvious, but I think if our relationships with our partners are generally strong and supportive as well as challenging, if we speak well of each other as well as being open about the challenges, and that we take collective ownership of those challenges and recognize that it's rare that something can be laid at the door of an individual or an individual partner. So we all need to play our part in tackling these challenges, and that's the kind of culture and atmosphere that we promulgate in our system. Then I think, if you like, that's an ecosystem within which effective peer review can flourish. And I think accountability is also important as well. And I can see that Kathy's just made a comment there, which I couldn't agree with more. I think if you've also got a culture that expects people to play their part, own their issues and be proactive and follow up on them, and if you like, we role model that ourselves by doing the things to say that we'll do, and delivering on those. So that's a culture of expectation, that people take responsibility and do what they can and do what they said they'll do to try and tackle issues. Then I think that's the culture within which peer review and follow-up of the outcome of peer review is more likely to be kind of more robust and effective.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jacqueline. Kevin, let's bring you into the conversation.
You asked me second one, but I'd forgotten that one. Sorry.
Oh yeah, it's more about how we operationalize. But let's come back to that and bring Kevin in first.
All right. Yeah.
Hey, Kevin.
Thanks very much, Amar. Thanks very much, Jacqueline. Yeah, really interested in what you said about the roles, people knowing what their role is, what they're expected to contribute, what their accountability might be in that respect, but also that mutual respect and safe space that everyone needs to provide. In the sort of context of a co-production project, it's very important that the experts by experience know what their role is, what the extent of that co-production is going to be. Is it working on a sort of focus group? Is it working on some information leaflets, or is it actually co-designing the actual change model of care? So that's in that respect. And also from the peer review point of view, when it comes to co-production, it's very interesting to actually say, would you do it again? How did it work for you? Was it good for you? So that we actually review the way that we've done it, the way we've co-produced. It applies to other methodologies as well, but I think with co-production, it's a very important one. Would you do it again? And I'm afraid to say sometimes people would say no, but again, that's just something to feed into a process improvement. Thanks very much.
Sure.
Thanks very much, Kevin. How would you recommend, Jacqueline, that people might either take some of the learning that you've offered and design something in their own organization or their own system if they don't have a structured, systematic approach to it in the way that you've just described? What might be your sort of tips and advice to people?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed, I think, to find an organisation where there isn't, if you don't have your own personal experience of participating in a peer review process, and you haven't got colleagues, you know, at least 1 or 2 degrees of separation at the most, who've got experience of peer review. So very much, I think, would start by talking to people in whatever place you're in about what the kind of, if you like, history and lived experience of peer review is in that place, because that was one of the big learning from the work that we did on the discharge, that whatever your understanding is of the kind of efficacy and usefulness and approach to peer review might be, other people might have a completely different experience of an understanding, including the kind of poor experience or fatigue of it that the colleague who just spoke mentioned. So I think I would very much start with taking an inquiring approach to what's the kind of history and experience of peer review here, and see what resources already exist and what's around. I think it's always great to sort of steal with pride or borrow with pride, and so I'm very much offering this toolkit out for anybody who wants to take it away. And just to be clear, I have no problem at all if you want to sort of take it apart and put it back together with a local logo on it. So because very much sometimes that if something's owned locally, then that's helpful too. I would ask that, if possible, if people could share back learning, that we'd really appreciate that, so that we can hear from other people's experience of what works well. So the more it's used, the better it'll get, I'm sure. But yeah, and also I'm a great advocate personally of giving it a go. I think if you you don't let, if you like, perfect be the enemy of good, and once you've kind of given some thought and done some engagement with kind of colleagues and partners and whoever you're going to be working with, then I think to some extent you've got to dive in and have a go, but dive in with that open mind and almost that kind of live reflective thought process running while you're doing it, so that you're kind of doing it but also thinking about how it's going, and what you might do differently next time. So that would be my recommendations.
Yeah, that's super advice, Jacqueline, and very generous offer as well to people to take what you've built, spent lots of time and effort creating, adapt it and share it back with you in the spirit of all learning together. So that's very, very generous. Thank you so much for your contribution to the country on that. I think one of the things to think about if you're designing this kind of thing is how we can have clinical leaders, clinicians right at the center of this, and service users helping us, patient service users, people in the community, guiding us about what are the questions that would really matter, what are the standards that people would expect to see, and then how can they help us design something that's meaningful for people to make use of. The other thing I'm just reflecting on as we come to the end of this conversation is just how critical it can be to be able to take a step away from the day-to-day work. It's very hard to do that given how busy the NHS is all the time and all of us are inundated, but just that ability to take a step away and look at something else, a similar service somewhere else, or even to share your learning with another team, gives you the opportunity to view the system in a different way. And as who was it who put it into the chat? Louise, you put into the chat, lots of things we can pick up and take away that are no cost, very simple to do, but we just often don't see it because we're so close to our own systems that we can't see the opportunities sometimes. So Jacqueline, you've offered us a wonderful design for a way that we can learn from each other across different parts of the health and care system. And I think all of us could take something away from this and think, how do we either strengthen what we've got in our own system or organization, or design something if it doesn't really exist in the systematic way that you've described, because I can't see a world in which we wouldn't benefit from looking at each other's services with a critical eye and a way to help each other improve. So Jacqueline, thank you so much for sharing today. It's been a joy to have you with us and to share the work you've been doing so far in North East and North Cumbria. And I look forward to hearing how this progresses. And if anyone on the call wants to take this away and do something with it in the future in your own place, I'm sure Jacqueline and her team would love to hear how we get on. Any final words, Jacqueline, before we
No,
close?
absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to share, and thanks for all of the comments. And it's called the Peer Review Toolkit, so you should be able to find it if you go to the Boost website, and we're also, I think, generously going to share this recording, so we'll post this on the Boost website as well, in case it's helpful to point colleagues to the kind of exposition of what it is and how we got here. No, I just appreciate all the comments, and I look forward to any further feedback people have if they get the chance to give it a bit of a road test. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Well, there's a great invitation. Thank you, Jacqueline. Thanks everyone for joining today. I hope you've enjoyed it and taken something away that you can take back to your own service and organisation. This is just one of a series of sessions. So look on the website. The links have gone in the chat for future lunch and learns, and also masterclasses where we try and bring in real experts in particular aspects of improvement that we can all learn from. Hope to see you on one of those soon. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.